Hello and welcome to Japanese Politics 101 with Timothy Langley, CEO and Representative Director of Langley Squire, and me, your host, Maya Matsuoka. Even though the Olympics and Olympic-related events have dominated the news during the past week, the week itself has been eventful in politics and public affairs too. Tomin First Nukai, Ms. Koike's party, got fewer seats in the Metropolitan Assembly, and the LDP members continue to flex muscles within the party, and the government still faces the challenge of dealing with the increased Chinese power. So, Timothy, where shall we start?
I'm going to talk about Tokyo elections. It's the first on my list. I'm going to go from there. The next hottest topic to me are what's going on with vaccines. You'll remember Minister Kono said, well, we don't have as many as we thought we had. That was a big bombshell. After it's go, 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 go. After vaccines, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Olympics. There's not a lot to say there, even though everybody kind of knows what's going on. So there's not much use for me to analyze it or to spin it. It is what it kind of is. More importantly, after the talk about Olympics, I want to get into geopolitical. There's a lot going on geopolitical that involves Japan and carries implications for us who live here. And then finally, although it's not the least interesting of what we're going to talk about, I'd like to talk about Mr. Suga. It's becoming, as I predicted last week, it'll kind of go to the background a little bit. There'll be some movements and things going on, but it won't really start hitting the hot buttons for another 2 or 3 weeks. Get us through the elections, the Olympics, and then the gloves will be off, and you'll see a lot of fisticuffs. And then there are a couple of other things that I'd just like to toss in there about what's going on in Japan, because I think there are a lot of people that are involved in a lot of different things that are important to us. For example, tourism is a hot issue, and it's a kind of barometer of where we're going and what's happening, and how the gates are opening or being closed. So that's the kind of outline of today, and I'll try and get through it really quickly so that we can open the floor and get into a really lively discussion. Thank you very much, by the way. Last week we had such a great discussion. I think although the room went for about an hour and 40 minutes, I only talked for about 30 minutes or 35 minutes, and the rest was on dialogue, and it wasn't just dominated by me. So I think that makes for a really rich room, because as you all know, I don't know half of what I'm talking about, but it engages a good discussion. So please weigh in when you feel it. You don't need to wait for a break, but let's get started with the Tokyo elections. So this time last week was the voting day for the elections for the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. It wasn't the election for the governor, because she doesn't stand for election yet, but it was for the seats. And the Komeito and the CDP were expected to win better, and the LDP was expected to win maybe 55 seats. There are 147 seats. They were supposed to do really, really well. And when we went into it, Tomin First is the leading party. It is the party that was initiated by Governor Koike after she became governor. And it had 45 seats. Komeito had 23 seats, and the LDP 25 seats. And the interesting dynamic with Tokyo is that, like in national politics, the LDP formed a coalition with Komeito, therefore getting a supermajority in the upper house and a majority in the lower house. And Koike did the same thing in Tokyo metropolitan politics. She made a coalition with Komeito, not the LDP in Komeito. It was Tomin First in Komeito. This was when she first took over the governorship. And over the 4 years of this round of election or candidate of occupying their 4-year terms, there has been a kind of a falling out of love. And so Komeito was something of a floater, but being courted heavily by the LDP because the LDP wants to replicate in Tokyo what it has at the national level. And so there's a lot of horse trading with the LDP and Komeito at the national level about, can't we be friends like we are in national politics at the metropolitan area? And so it looks like they won that fight or that negotiation, and the LDP and Komeito kind of joined forces for this election. And as a consequence of that, all the predictions were that the LDP is just going to crush Tomine first. It's going to take between 50 and 55 seats. That means 50, 100% better. It's got 25 before we went into the election this time last week, and the predictions were that they would end up with 50 or 55. That was all the news. And Komeito likely would do well, and Tomine were supposed to go down. And I think maybe the governor felt that, like I said, she helped start the party, then fell out of love. She became a senior advisor for Tomine first. And then just when they need her, she gets sick and she doesn't campaign. And that hurts people a lot, and it sends a really strong signal. And the signal is, although, I started and I initiated this Tomine first, you guys, you just went off on your own. You didn't let me be the main figure and the chief priestess, and you went off on your own, and so I don't like you anymore. So I will help other candidates, other politicians in the Tokyo central government, if I like you. So not along party lines. And so she was somewhat ambivalent about Tomine first only, and she didn't campaign for Tomine first. And then this kind of relationship with her and Nikai that we can talk about a little bit later. So come Saturday, she finally comes out and campaigns. She comes out from sickness and she campaigns a little bit. Whereas if you've been watching the news, Komeito and the LDP and the Constitution Democratic Party have been, the bigwigs from the national body have been campaigning for their candidates crazy. And until she went out and started talking, people said, the LDP is going to do really well. In only one day of campaigning, it flipped it over. And then they said it's, the LDP is not going to do that well because she's come out and started campaigning. And in fact, the results were that Maya touched on it. I think the barometer is that the LDP and Komeito get a majority in the Tokyo Metropolitan seats. That's not the mark. If they don't win significantly, that's the mark. And they didn't win significantly. So the LDP picked up 8 seats, but that's a far cry from 25 seats that was predicted. So they currently hold 33 seats. Komeito didn't pick up any. They're still at 23. Tomine, they lost, about 12 seats, which is not great. They're sitting now at 31 seats. The Japan Communist Party has 19 seats now, where did I say 9? I meant 19, where they had 18 before, so they picked up 1. That's the Japanese Communist Party. And then the Constitutional Democratic Party picked up additional 7 seats. That's 15. And the reason why, and you can hear it in my voice, the gravelly voice that I have because I didn't get my ration of coffee today. The reason why this is so important is because it suggests, it projects what's going to happen in the national elections. That's why this election was so important and why it was watched so heavily. What's going to happen and how are things going to unfold for national elections? So the LDP and Komeito working together, and you take this seat and I'll give you that one, and we won't run a candidate there, and you give us this one here. That kind of horse trading, and it seemed to work only a little bit. And so how Tomine first were able to preserve their, they're the largest party. They're not a majority, but they're the largest, and unfortunately they've lost their coalition with Komeito. So Tokyo politics will be a little bit more fractious going forward. We've got the Olympics, and then we've got the Paralympics, and then we have the national election, and things will be a little bit rough in Tokyo, which suggests that if you're a tired governor and you think you were on your way to achieve great things, but the guys that you helped and that you nurtured, they kind of went their own direction, and screw you, I'm out of here. I mean, she did great. She's done a great job. I'm not suggesting that she's going to resign, but there are indications that is a possibility. I've always laughed at them, because why would you jump from being the queen bee in Tokyo politics to going to national politics, where you're not going to be the queen? You've got lots of things to fight with, and in fact, my good friend Claude, teased me maybe two clubhouse sessions ago. What do you think about Koike, running and becoming prime minister? And it's so laughable, which is, I teased him back, but the prospect of her cutting and running is becoming a little bit more likely. And the reason why I say that is because, and thanks, Claude, I see you're on the room too. The reason why I say that is because 2 days after the election, so the election was on Saturday, the results were kind of produced on Monday, confirmed on Monday, she went to visit with Nikai in the LDP headquarters. It's hugely suggestive, right? Why would she do that? Why would she have that opportunity to be quizzed by the press and also be publicly kowtowing, maybe? Anyway, reporting to Mr. Nikai. It's very curious. And they've had a long relationship, a long personal relationship. And he is the Secretary General of the LDP. And so it is very suggestive of what she could be thinking in her own mind. Of course, she would never say anything like that before the elections, because it would what's the right word? Queer the deal. It would reveal her hand somewhat. And so, of course, nothing was done or said about that. But I think you might anticipate hearing a little bit more from Koike going forward. So it's kind of like a lot of things, just up in the air right now, what she's going to do. But it's interesting because it was just a week ago, and there's still more to be seen with it. So let me just tie up Tokyo elections so we can move briskly on to my next issue, which will be vaccines. But there are a lot of people that have signed on. Yes, go ahead and sign on with, if you have a question or if you think you might want to contribute, just go ahead and raise your hand and flash it a couple of times if you have something to say. Otherwise, I'll just move on right away to vaccines. Good. I see Yuka, but you're not flashing.
What do you mean by flashing? I'm sorry.
The mic, your mic.
Yeah, you hit your mic off and on and off and on. And then
No, because, I can be polite sometimes,
Oh, you can flash in other ways too. It's just that since it's Clubhouse, we can't say anything.
Okay, so, I'm kind of very naive regarding politics, but since the name of the club is Japanese Politics 101, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask, when you said coalition between two parties, what does it exactly mean? Is that a one-off thing, one election at a time, or can you explain to me?
So that's a great question. So a coalition means it's far deeper than just for the election. So when you're having these conversations and you're smoking cigarettes in a room that's got layers of bluish smoke, this is what you're talking about. It's horse trading, and even though our politics don't match, it's all for maybe solidifying your power base or maybe increasing it by a couple of numbers. That's the first point. And the second point is that together we're stronger because we've reached a critical mass. So 51%, or 2/3 of the House. So that was the reason for, or that's typically the reason for forming a coalition. It's to increase your power base, and then you, even though it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, you would vote for your coalition party's issues because they've decided to vote for your coalition, for your party's issue. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay, I think I'm getting there.
In terms of solidarity, it usually is good for a good term of time, because it takes a lot. You know, you have to explain to your members, the members of your party, why you decided, you know, that homosexuality and LGBT is an issue that we support. We go in. When you didn't say that, you know, 3 months ago, and it's not something that we believe in. But you have to explain to them, well, we kind of acquiesce there because we're going to get more spending for, you know, child care, and that was more important to us. So we kind of horse traded. So it does cause a little bit of consternation among the voters, but in the long term, it's supposed to enhance you. So coalition, it's kind of like a joint venture that we talk about from time to time.
Okay,
you know,
I got it. Yes.
Yeah.
Now I got it. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. So, okay, if you care about economic growth of Japan, and again, I'm asking, I don't want to put you on the spot, but who we would like to see at the top? Is that a hard question, or is that depend on your view, or depend on the time, or however you like to address? And if you don't want to talk about this, I totally understand.
No, it's a great question. I don't know if I have the right answer. I think anybody who is in the position of power wants the economy to go get better. And how you do that, the policies that you implement. I mean, you see this with Biden versus Trump too. The policies change and they spend money in different ways because they think that is going to trigger more enthusiasm and more inspiration from the working voters. So similarly here in Japan, it's not so. It's mostly personality. I mean, it's everybody. The leader is almost always going to be the LDP anyway, and LDP policies are pretty much formed by the LDP party headquarters, which is across the street from the upper house members building. So everybody's going to try and do that. They might change the governor of the Bank of Japan governorship. He's been there for a long time. Different policies, how they spend, but it's always going to be an LDP person. They're going to want to generate more money so that they can participate in that largesse too. The better the economy goes, the richer the LDP becomes too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Yuka. Ren, how are you?
Good morning, how are you?
Always great to see you. I looked at your profile and my God, you've got so many followers. You're really a well-connected guy. Thanks for joining us.
No, not really. But thank you. Hey, I have a very simple question because you mentioned this is a preview, should I say, prelude to the national election, right?
Right.
And forget about what Japanese media are saying. I would like to hear what Timothy say. Why you think that coalition didn't really succeed? What was the reason behind it? Personal opinion, I don't think anybody's going to hold that against you. So if you could share your thought.
Okay, thank you. Anything that I say has already been echoed or actually repeated within the Japanese press and in some of the rag magazines that come out. But the coalition didn't end because the election came. The coalition disintegrated over the last 4 years. So it's kind of leads on to what Yuka was saying. Why do they make a coalition? Well, they make a coalition because they have this dream that together they'll be stronger, and some of the issues that I have will get prominence because I've got the coalition partner who promises to vote with me. Some of the ones that I still care about, I have to give up. because that's the trade-off for this coalition. They did that 4 years ago, and it just didn't quite work. So I don't have to stay in the coalition. I'm not married to you. It's a coalition for my benefit. And if I don't see that benefit, then I'm going to put a finger in your eye, and I'm going to go someplace else. And through this 4-year period, you've seen that there's been this testing. Are we good together? Are we confident with each other? Did I get what I thought I was bargaining for when I voted for your issue, which I didn't like? And I had to explain to my members, but I did it. And now when I ask you to do what I want you to do, you're saying, go over there and that doesn't work. So that's one of the issues. The other issue, and you've heard this before too, that Koike was a little bit draconian in her way of handling the assembly. She didn't really listen to a lot of her advisors, and she was kind of off on her own sometimes, and very not mean-spirited, but just my way or the highway. And there's a lot of criticism against her for her method and her kind of attitude as chief queen. So that's rubbed people wrong too. And then the final one is just her emphasis on policies. For example, the movement of the fish market from Tsukiji, right? That was a huge controversy. The way it was handled, the delay, the building of the stadium, thousands of issues. Building roads, that sort of thing. There's thousands of issues that come up, and horse trading is a daily thing. And I think it just disintegrated over time. So as we moved into this election, Koike knew that she didn't have a coalition partner. She was pretty much going it alone. But her response to that was, it's not just Tomin first that I'm dedicating myself to. Anybody else, all you guys here that are in my assembly, as long as you are nice to me and I feel like I have an affinity with you, even if you're with Komeito or you're with the Constitutional Democratic Party, we can deal with each other one-on-one. And I think that was her strategy.
I see. Thank you very much. That's interesting.
Okay, moving on. I don't see any more flashing. Let's talk about vaccines. What a shocker, It's just like rock and roll, isn't it? Kono Taro comes out guns blazing. We've got vaccines out the wazoo, and go ahead, if you have a company or a chamber of commerce or a university, make an application. If you can handle maybe 600, 700 people a day, you are somebody I want to talk to. And they started accepting these applications. You'll remember that. This kind of news broke, gosh, it wasn't that long ago, 3 weeks ago. Everybody was excited about it, signing up. And then on Friday, he says, we're going to have to put a stop to that. So no more applications. Thank you very much. Looks like we're getting all of these old farts, the 60 years and older. We've got, more than 50% of them inoculated on their first one. On their first shot. We'll take care of them before the end of July for their second shot. Going into this, there were lots of stories about how much was being stockpiled and how the government didn't even know that there were warehouses full of refrigerated supply. That's difficult to swallow, but that was part of the story that was coming out. But we had more than enough. We had so much that we're going to ship some to Taiwan, to Vietnam. We're going to be doing, vaccine diplomacy. That was a point of conversation 2 weeks ago, I think. Might have been 3. But now it comes out that we don't have enough. So of course, there's lots of conspiracy theories about why this is. But it's a head scratcher. Different. It could be a political thing. So, for example, the governor of Osaka, the governor of Hyogo Prefecture came in to the prime minister's office and, we need some vaccines. We need more. We're not getting enough. Could you please make sure that you give some to us, Mr. Prime Minister? And the prime minister said to both of them, yeah, we're working on it, but I think rather than sending a bunch to you, it's going to diminish those that I can send to the rest of the population throughout the country. So, please wait your turn. That's like a, thank you for coming to visit me, but no thank you. That kind of response. So it could be that, I've got an election coming up and, Hyogo is important to me and Osaka is important to me, and you want these vaccines, and I have the ability to send them to you, but, I'm getting a little bit butthurt by, the politics that are going on there, and I'm worried about my standing. There could be some influence there. But the funny story is that we were all told that Japan is awash in vaccines, and now we need to put a quash to it. We have been told, as a consequence of that there will be 100 million coming in from Pfizer at the end of June, right? So they should already be here, 100 million inoculations. And between July and September, we should get another 70 million of Pfizer and then 50 million from Moderna. That's a lot. And if they're doing about 1 million a day, which they have hit about 1 million a day, they should be, fine, at least by the end of September. So they've canceled appointments in Kobe as of, I think, maybe today or tomorrow. So they've canceled taking on more appointments there. They've promised that the 60-year and older who have received their first shot are guaranteed to get their second shot, but the younger people and then the new inoculations are kind of on hold. In Chiba and in Osaka, they've halted from, next week they're going to halt accepting more applications for inoculation. So it's really funny what's going on there. I don't know what the political play is there. It could be that, in fact, they didn't count well enough, and you say, people know how to count in Japan, and they know how to do logistics and warehousing, and so it does make you scratch your head. I don't have a really good firm answer for it, but it's one of those issues that when we open the room for comment, I'm sure other people might have a different insight. Maybe you've got better intel on it than I do, but that broke on Friday, so it's a very interesting thing on vaccines. I'd like to close up vaccines, see if there are any questions. If you have a question, come up to the room and flash your mic. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to Olympics. Maya, do you have anything?
Well, it seems that everybody's kind of tired already with the news, and up and down and such things as regards the vaccines. So I think that we can continue with the next topic and then probably come back to this one after we're all done with the other topics as well.
Okay, well, that's not a very good segue, because if you're tired of hearing about the vaccines and the ups and downs, my next topic is kind of even worse. I want to talk about the Olympics. And on the Olympics, I have the fewest comments to say, because I think everybody kind of already knows. We're moving into a state of emergency tomorrow. It will go for, tomorrow's maybe the 12th? It'll go for a little bit more than a month, get us past the Olympics and into the Paralympics, and then we'll see. We'll see what happens, right? So it's a little bit more than a month. And it's because the numbers are starting to spike. I mean, the perfect storm. And you can see it on Mr. Suga's face. He just looks exhausted. And if you live or do work downtown, I'm downtown a lot. I'm in the Diet, almost not every day, but I'm in the Diet weekly. The amount of police presence and the amount of traffic that's going into the cabinet minister's office and the prime minister's compound, there's just a lot of activity there. And then, the Olympics are here. So I went to a meeting yesterday at the ANA Hotel down very close to the prime minister's office. And they've got one floor of the parking garage that's occupied by Olympics, something having to do with the Olympics. So it's really starting to build. There's a lot going on. But the big news, which everybody knows, I don't need to go into it, is that, the spectators, there will be no spectators in the Tokyo components. There will be spectators according to the combinations that we already talked about, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, of 50% of capacity or 100,000 people, whichever is least. So there will be a lot of events where people can go. There will be spectators, but probably the big ones will be reduced. And now they have a big headache. You remember last week I told you that the lotteries for the people who were holding the tickets would be happening the next day, and then they delayed that, and then it came out, I think on Friday, who's going to be able to attend the events that they have tickets for. And they might have had tickets for one event that has been canceled, and they've received another ticket in exchange for that, or a voucher for having the ticket repurchased. So it's going to be tough. The corporations have pulled out. There are no parties. Obviously, there's no need to have corporate parties. It used to be really fun, especially during the Rugby World Cup. Corporations would hold their own tents, and you could get tickets to that, and that was a lot of fun, and food and drink. That's all gone. So the booths are gone. The omiyage, sales, they're gone. And then they've said, alcohol ban. My God, here in Japan, what are the journalists going to do? Because they're all alcoholics anyway. How are you going to be able to enjoy Tokyo? You've come here to do a story. That's, the ban doesn't affect just the visitors, but also the economy here. So a lot of people are up in arms on it. So it remains to be seen how that rolls. You'll remember in where was it, in Malaysia, I think. No, it was in Taiwan, where the spread of COVID was so low, and it was so remarkable that the Taiwanese had somehow they had figured it out, and then all of a sudden it exploded. And it exploded because the pilots who were flying airplanes coming in and out, they had a little bit of a free pass because they're vetted, they're professional pilots and that sort of thing. And it turns out that the reason why they had such an explosion of COVID in Taiwan was because of the pilots. The pilots came in, so they come in, they fly for one day, it's maybe a 12 or 20 hour flight, and then they get 2 or 3 days off. So they relax, they go to a hotel, and then they party. And it seems like that was what happened there. So the Japanese, following this, see the foreign journalists coming into Japan as the same kind of quality of visitor. They're not athletes who are very carefully monitored and vetted before they come in, and then they're tested every day. But they're coming in support of the Olympics, so they get a little bit of a free pass. And there are a lot of them. There are more than 1,000 coming from China alone. These are journalists, and it's not a complete free pass, but you do have a little bit more flexibility to travel, to do stories, and those are the ones that are the riskiest. And so that's why the Japanese government says, the journalists are coming in, we're going to watch them very carefully, and if they don't abide by the rules and regulations, they will be ejected immediately. I think you're going to see a lot of that going on. People are going to be pushing the envelope, and they're not going to be prepared, and I think we're not prepared for the level of surveillance that will be applied to them, and there'll be a lot of controversy, and it'll be a pretty big news item. Anyway, that's about it for the Olympics. If anybody have any questions, if I haven't touched on something that you really want to talk about, maybe that's because I don't know, but maybe it's just because that's about the hottest things you can say about the Olympics. So with that, I'd like to close this up, move on to geopolitical after this.
It's interesting how the population and, basically, yes, Sakura, just give me a few seconds, please. So it's interesting how the population is very much against the journalists roaming freely around the country, but at the same time, the Japanese have been traveling freely as well, right? So it's interesting how, and we already know that, well, quite a few of the variants are in Japan, so they have been imported, they are here. So even if we have the journalists, well, it's not really sure that they will be the real spreaders, right? Because, well, the population is traveling anyway, even in the case of the state of emergency. The other day, on Friday morning, actually, when I was going to work, the train was packed. It was full. Of course, nobody was talking, everybody was masked. But at the same time, even with those precaution measures, well, movement hasn't been halted at all. So it's interesting to see how things turn out, and at the same time there is no I mean, in the news, right, all about the news are all about the journalists and the athletes, and they never actually comment about people traveling around here.
Yeah, they're worried about the journalists. My God, what about the Bulgarians,
Oh yeah, I mean, those dangerous guys, who have sneaked here, and indeed, that's true. Sakura, I saw you were flashing your mic. Are you still there?
Oh, hello. Oh yes.
Hello, Sakura.
Hello.
Sorry. I couldn't. I have 2 hands that were actually full. I couldn't even get to the flashing. I mean, yes, I did flash. I had a question that was at the beginning of the Olympics commentary. I don't know if it's appropriate or not. First of all, can you hear me? It says that I don't have.
Sure, it sounds like a little bit of an echo, but
That's so strange. It says I don't even have a signal. Thank you so much for holding this room, Timothy-san and Masaya-chan. I just wanted to ask you, this may be an odd question, but I would like to ask you about the Shikari, I think is your last name, Richardson scandal here. Is it a very big thing? I have 2 questions. The first question is it a very big deal that she has been suspended from the Olympics? Is there an uproar in Japan over this? Thank you.
I don't think it's much of an issue. It is reported only because it's coming out of America, and America is the font of all things interesting and quirky, and why do Americans do things this way, and that sort of thing. But I think for the Japanese, and we have Japanese people in the audience, so let's ask them. I think it's interesting that America does things like this, and yeah, of course she's smoking marijuana. Of course, get her the hell out of here. Taima. It's it's the road to insanity. So maybe other people in the room. Ren, you have anything to say? Although probably I'm more Japanese than you are at this point.
Yeah, it's the Taima, the marijuana. It's some states, including Colorado, it's legal in the U.S. So I think a lot of Japanese people know that. So I think there are 2 camps, right? Well, what's the big deal? And in the other camp is like you are a professional. It's Olympics athletes are not professionals, but professional full-time athletes shouldn't do this. So I guess I can go either way. I'm on the fence. I want to say to you.
I agree. I think it's most of the people are just on the fence. They don't really care that much. It's not that huge of a deal. There are other Japanese in the audience. If you have a view or a strong view, or if you have a representative sample, please go ahead and weigh in now. And otherwise, we'll move on to the next topic.
The reason why, my follow-up question, may I ask one more question, moderator?
Sure.
About this. The reason why I asked is because I don't know. Obviously, I live in California, as you know. I've been here before, and I do follow this case and other cases. Right now, I do investigative. I do research, a lot of research for investigative journalists that are usually independent, and there's rumblings that there's going to be a riot because of this. There are a lot of groups and factions, some that are extremists, who are blaming the Japanese government that they banned her because of her ethnicity. So this is we're expecting riots in Los Angeles and Southern California where I live. So that's why I'm asking this question. Have you heard any issues that?
But they're going to have riots where, on Venice Beach?
I don't know about Venice Beach, but I mean this is rumblings. This is why I'm up here asking, and I have another question about Suga when we get to him. But I've asked this question in other Japanese rooms, and they say that nobody's really talking about it, about the Shikari Harrison deal, suspension. But in the United States, it's a huge topic, especially in Southern California where I live. So this is why I'm asking. But
how about that? Isn't that interesting? We're talking about Japanese news and politics here, and it's as far as I know, it's not even a blip on the radar. Whereas you cross the Pacific, you go to California or Boulder, Colorado, and it's a huge issue.
Many Americans do not even understand that there is a Olympic Council that have made these decisions. They believe that it's the ones that are wanting a riot and protest, which may or may not turn into a rioting situation. They believe that it's the Japanese government that is actually down here. This is fascinating to me because I've been following this for a few weeks. So I'm just
I kind of doubt that.
I'm sorry.
That sounds to me to be it's an internal issue with the but the Japanese are real sticklers for rules, so it could be that there's an inflection there, but I don't think that they would be driving the bus on that.
I don't think that they would either. I think that would be a very bad political move if they decided to unilaterally.
Sure.
I don't think that they can unilaterally suspend someone without a say-so of the Olympic Council. Am I right? I mean, she's an American, so. She's
an American, and it's illegal. It's not illegal in California where she was doing it. So I don't know. It's a fly in the ointment as far as I'm concerned.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll wait for the next for the Suga presentation.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sakura.
Secret agent?
Secret agent, yes. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you are.
Yeah, I'm in the Pacific time zone in California. I just wanted to respond to it because I think the rule, it was set by the World Anti-Doping Agency that they have cannabis on the banned substances list.
I already know that, Agent. I'm out here asking about these two people because they live in Japan. I already know who you are. Thank you.
Oh, who I am? Yeah, but I was just talking about the doping case and.
I already know. That's not why I'm in the U.S. rooms asking. Excuse me. I don't mean to be rude, Maya and Timothy-san. It's just that this person. I do not like this person.
Okay.
I'm sorry to hear that. Okay. Well, I was just going to.
And you don't. And I want you to stop responding to me directly. Thank you.
Okay. I'll just respond to the topic.
Okay, please go ahead and tell us, yes, but well, we still have also other topics, so, okay? Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, so I don't think it was the Japanese government, I think it was the World Anti-Doping Agency that set the rules for the Olympics in general. And I do think it's very unfortunate. I think they should remove cannabis from the list. It's not a performance-enhancing drug. As someone mentioned, it's being legalized in the U.S. and many other countries. Canada's legalized, for instance, but that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah. Initially, when I first heard about it, I thought it was being applied to the person who refused to stand up, or she turned her back on the flag, and it was kind of political retribution. But it's not. It's a completely different issue. But she's fast, and people want to see her run, but. Something tripped it up. It's mysterious, and they say it's because of the application of the rules. I find that mysterious too, coming out of the Americans. I mean, the Americans want to win, and they want, there are lots of justifications for either putting her on the team or taking her off. But it's just a curious thing that happened.
Yes, and
thanks, Agent.
Thank you. And knowing that, all kinds of drugs are prohibited in Japan, probably that's, another thing which led to the decision. Well, it's, of course, a second thought, or yeah, and not directly related to it, but still. Yes, as Timothy said, Japan is a stickler to the rules, so indeed. So it's the population too, not only the government. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on, and then if we have time, maybe we can see a fight between Sakura and Agent. Oh, she dropped off? That would be kind of entertaining. I wish this also had video. Anyway, let's move on. She's back. Mayuko, we're going to talk about. Sorry, go ahead.
Maya-chan, I sent you a private message. Please check it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
There's a specific reason why I said the things that I did. This is a serious issue.
Okay, thank you for
I'm
that.
going to go back to the audience. I really don't want to be up here with this.
Yes.
No, we sense that. We respect it. Yeah, I mean, we got lots of things to talk about, and we're interested in these kind of points of controversy. We just don't want to have a physical fight in front of everybody.
Thank you. Okay, let's proceed with the geopolitics. There is a lot going on there too.
Thank you. There's a lot going on in geopolitics. Thank you, Maya. There's a lot going on. Mayuko, I guess you're on the first up, and we got a. You were here last week, but you weren't here 2 weeks ago, and boy, that still hurts us because you're right there on the ground in Hong Kong. There is a lot going on in Hong Kong. It is so scary because it's like a lot of things, it's what happens in the future is spelled out by what happens today. And when you walk things back, you can come to the conclusion of course it was going to happen because these things happen. It doesn't always roll out that way, but when you unravel them, Hong Kong is going through such a transition as the government begins to exert its influence and the security law begins to take hold. It is a threatening and scary prospect of what is going to happen. And for the Chinese, it appears that they want the land and the buildings and all of the jobs that go with it, but not the people. We'll populate the right kind of people there, but not the ones that are here right now. It seems like that seems to be the strategy. And if you live in Hong Kong and you can get out, you've probably already left. You've moved your money. You've moved your extended family out. You're living in Canada or Australia or maybe even Japan. And it's getting harder and harder for the people to leave because of the economic power that they individually have. Anyway, I'd like to get Mayuko's input on that after we go through this. There's a lot to talk about. Myanmar is experiencing blackouts. The grip of the junta on running the machinery of an economy is being tested, and the pockets of guerrilla warriors is beginning to pop up. These are college students and young workers who are no longer going to work. Schools have been opened, but it's usually the people that are going to the school are those who are affiliated with the military junta and not the regular population. So the economy is still in the throes of a huge turmoil. So it's something to keep an eye on. We didn't talk about it last week because it wasn't as obvious, but it seems as if it's building now, and that the people are up in arms, and other powers are going to be infiltrating their influence there by money, probably armaments and training. So it could be just a real mess right there in the middle of the most important area on the globe right now, the Asia Pacific. So it's something that we watch very carefully. Moving on, North Korea had a very interesting thing. So you might remember that the news was North Korea is the utopian state, and there was no corona there, and everybody is happy and healthy. And it turns out that, of course, that's not the case. And Kim Jong-un went through a little bit of a house cleaning last Tuesday. And this isn't something that happens very often. So when it does happen, it's newsworthy, and it's suggestive of a lot of things, of maybe his stability within the leadership, or his desire to do something that not everybody is fully behind, and so he changes the leadership. And for a country like North Korea, that's populated by the old soldiers, the guys who are heroes of the revolution. Families are deep. The last time he did this was in 2013. Is Stephen Nagy here in the room? I'm sure Stephen has plenty to offer. I don't see him.
Not yet.
Okay. But the last time he did this was in 2013. It was a large purge, and he even had one of his uncles magnificently executed, to drive home the point. So you've probably remembered that. Anyway, not as dramatic, but he did a shakeup. So one of the things that I was worried about was during the Olympics that he would pull one of his antics again, as he did a couple of years ago by firing a couple of rockets into the Japan Sea. And I was worried that with all of the attention on Tokyo, that would be a perfect time to do something like that. And it looks like that's less likely now. So apparently he's got things that he's got to focus on. The other interesting thing in our region is Duterte, the president of the Philippines. Has anybody noticed the switch, the pivot to China that he has been pursuing a little bit more aggressively now? I thought he was threatening China, and that his boats were mirroring Chinese boats, and he was the big guy, and he was going to he was not going to be pushed around by the Chinese. But it turns out that there are a couple of huge projects that the Chinese are funding, and typically the Chinese workers come in, and it's like a Japanese FDA. They bring in their own equipment and workers, and they build it, and so the money that's being spent is basically churned back into the home country. The receiving country gets the project; they get whatever it is, the bridge or the airport or the port facility. But the lion's share of the economic power that is generated as a result of that, it's not just left there in the receiving country. So there's a huge inter-community bridge in Manila that is being sponsored by the Chinese government. So now they're kind of lovey-dovey and friends, and Duterte went into to China to talk about how warm their relationship was. So this is really strange to see that sort of thing happen. It's part of the Belt and Road strategy that the Chinese are pursuing. They've been very successful in Africa, as we all know, and it is part of their political diplomacy. The other thing that's kind of interesting, I don't know how closely, I'm sure some people are watching it very closely, is what's going on with big tech. China is starting to really come down on foreign big tech in China, and the Indians are too. So the Indians, they are taking Facebook and Google and Apple to task for the monopoly power that they have on information gathering, on a lot of the things. It's so strange that it's just like reached a tipping point, and it's not just the Indians. It's not just the Chinese. Everybody is ganging up on GAFA, Google, Apple, Facebook, and what's the next one? Facebook. For their collection of information and how valuable that is, and how you can socially diagram and predict things that are happening. And even the United States is coming down hard. President Biden signed an executive order on Friday. This is huge stuff. And we haven't even gotten into what China is doing with the DD crackdown. Also Tencent, and what's happened with Ma, the chairman of Alibaba. He's doing fingerprinting now. I think he's taking classes with Joe Biden's son. and completely out of the public eye. There's a lot going on there. It is hugely important. It's important in terms of just not integrating the economy and digitizing the economy, but also cryptocurrency and making a national currency and making the crypto into fiat or as close to fiat as possible. There's a huge battle, something we almost never talk about on this show, about the United States having the world's in control of the world's currency, and this is the currency that international trade is driven on, and the Chinese deeply want to get away from that and make the yuan the currency of choice, and they're putting a lot of effort into that. They've launched their own national cryptocurrency. There's efforts going on in the United States right now. You might have heard that Visa card has accepted, recognized Bitcoin as a currency that will be exchanged into fiat currency. They will do that exchange for you and pay your bills as the credit card comes out, transferring from Bitcoin, your Bitcoin wallet, into the regular payment. This is just huge news. So much going on. And then finally, we predicted this in the past about, what in the hell are the Japanese going to do? Should there be a move from China to Taiwan? There are certain conventions between the United States and Japan about supply and support for U.S. actions, and putting that more into a beefier context, it requires the Japanese self-defense forces to be much more beefy. I mean, they spend a certain amount of their GDP on armaments and training and paying for the U.S. bases to be here in Japan, but it doesn't kind of meet the demand. And so they are now doing joint exercises. The maritime SDF forces are now in the, where are they? They're in the Gulf of Aden now on naval exercises. So it makes sense to me that they would be doing these naval exercises not here in the hottest theater or the potential theater where they would be doing things, but away from the public eye, away from reporters noticing it or seeing it, and doing naval exercises with the UK and also other naval forces too. So things are building up at a pretty brisk rate, and there could be a flashpoint, something that happens. It's interesting that the finance minister, Taro Aso, said, I think it was on Friday, he was on in a press conference, and he said it is Japan's duty to defend Taiwan should something come up and something happen there. So this is a public pronouncement by him. Sometimes he's loose at the lips, but typically when he says something, it's not because it's fantasy that he's just conjured up. It's because he's heard of it. He was supposed to keep his mouth shut. He wasn't supposed to go on elaborating about it, but he did. And that's a big piece of news too. With that, I'd like to close up geopolitics and open the floor up. I'm sure there's a lot more that can be said about it, but it is interesting, and it is all focused on this region where we live.
I was trying to flash me. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. But anyway, I have a question on can we go back to Didi and China?
Yes, please. It's so interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting because that announcement of government crackdown on Didi, it happened 2 days after IPO in US. So the timing was very interesting. So seriously, what exactly Chinese government trying to do? Is it really true that because they didn't celebrate the IPO, and I think it was so close to the party, like our anniversary, I forgot, 10 years, and then they
100 years.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. So what's the motivation on the government? I'm so clueless on this. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have all the answers. but I follow it, and it's so interesting. So they had their 100th anniversary. They told Didi, the shareholders and the investors of Didi, not to list in the New York Stock Exchange. Doing an IPO is like, driving an aircraft carrier. It takes a lot of development time. It takes a lot of people involved in it, a lot of investment houses, people putting documents together and satisfying the requirements for the Securities and Exchange Commission. It is a big deal. And they were told by the communist people, the Communist Party, the people that know these things, before the IPO, don't do it. And so all of the investors, all of the people who are waiting in the United States to purchase the initial stocks, and also the angel investors who have invested, they're waiting for a cash out. Usually when it's the IPO and you put in a couple of $1 million, your biggest payoff is, build it up, talk about how great it is. You launch your IPO, and then the market sets the price. And so as a shareholder, as an angel investor, you've invested, let's say, $1 million or $2 million into this company, this venture. It's going on in China. They've been successful in China. They're going to take that technology. They're going to IPO in the United States. I'm going to invest in that. For example, Masahiro Son, right, who invested heavily in Didi. So when they invest in this company, and they invest, let's say, $1 million, they get a certain number of shares once it goes to IPO. So you get, since you're an investor, you get a certain amount of shares, and you can hold them or you can sell them, but you have to wait for the IPO. So a lot of people are saying, I want to cash out. My intel is that things are going on in China, and it's probably not a great idea, but maybe we can trick enough people into buying it initially in the first 2 months of launching the company, so that I can get out, I can make my money, and I can go do something else. So the Chinese government said, don't do your IPO. And by the way, we're having a big party tomorrow, 100-year anniversary. And what they did was they went ahead and they launched on the day that the Chinese were having their 100-year anniversary, thinking that they wouldn't do anything. They're busy, with the celebrations. And it was only one day later they hammered them. So it's not just with Didi, it's with Tencent, it's with Ma, it's with Facebook, it's with all of these companies that are in China. They want to dominate, and they not only want to dominate, they want to incorporate it into the board, the family connections, the people who are running China. It's all, I think everybody knows, it's all interconnected. It's not what it's who in China, and you need these to satisfy these requirements. You have to have somebody that's sponsoring you. And I think the strategy is, this is the major question you had, is why are they doing this? What's the game plan? And it is, in an economy like the United States, you have lots of millionaires and billionaires who have their own company, and they buy newspapers, and they buy politicians, and they get invested in, the economy and politics and that sort of thing. And that's the model of the United States. Whereas in China, it's all run out of this Borg. It's a centralized government. Everybody knows each other. They're all related to each other. And on a global scale, competing between those two kind of philosophies, the Borg is always going to win. It's got more power. It's got more weight. There's less time wasted on disputes and figuring out price ranges and competition strategy and that sort of thing. The Borg is always going to win. So I think that's their strategy. It's a long-winded answer, but I think to me it sounds much more reasonable. Ren, I know you're following this very closely. Hayato, thanks for coming up. I'm sure both of you guys have a view. I'd like to hear.
Yeah, if I can just jump in and kind of answering Yuka's question directly. Well, first of all, how much did they raise, right? The amount they raised was $4.4 billion, right? And then it collapsed. It was a disaster. And who lost the money? It's mostly American investors, right? So I think you saw
Who cares?
this as well. Yeah, you saw this as well, Timothy, that the senators, especially the Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen, is calling on U.S. financial regulators to probe on this Chinese company. You know, what the hell are you doing in my country? Did you know that you are being questioned or investigated by your own government in China? Did you disclose that to our American people? Did you hide anything? If you hid anything and you went IPO, that is a crime in our country, right? So if these Chinese companies are trying to do business in my country, they are now going to learn how to do the right things in the US. They cannot bring their culture into my country to do the thing that they are doing in China. I think the reason America's economy is still strong is because we are transparent. That's why people have confidence in our country. And so if you want to IPO in New York Stock Exchange, you got to follow our rule. So I didn't invest in Didi, but I can imagine a lot of Americans are duly pissed, right? So I think I guess I'm speaking on my opinion now. I really want to see these Chinese companies follow our rule if you want to IPO in my country. And so I'm really supporting these senators probing on this. And I think this is going to be a really tough one. I don't think these senators are going to fight like a bulldogs. And I'm really interested in, and I think many people are interested in seeing what's going to happen in the next few weeks, because this is the biggest Chinese IPO, I think, since 2014. So depending on how they behave or how this is resolved in the next few weeks, it's going to define how future Chinese companies are going to go IPO in the United States. So that's my opinion, if that helps. Yuka?
Okay. Hayato, before you jump in, let me just add to what Ren said. The Chinese government also has announced to all the companies in China, if you are going to IPO anywhere else in the world, you need our approval, you need our authority to do that. So they're stopping all of that. I think what they're planning to do, or what the outcome of that is, that they're going to create their own Galapagos. The Japanese did that somewhat successfully. You could have these telephones that don't work anywhere else in the world, but since you build them in Japan and the Japanese consumers purchase them, it's okay. You can build a K car. Nobody else in the world is going to buy a K car except maybe Indonesia or India, but Japan will buy enough of the supply that it makes it worthwhile. I think the Chinese have taken that and magnified it. They'll have their own Galapagos. They're not going to be investing in the United States. They're not going to let these American investors make more money off the ideas and the technologies that the Chinese develop. They have their own economy. They've got Africa too. So the border lines will be drawn. And if you want to IPO in evil America, we're just not going to let you. And the Americans will respond in kind. So this battle, the battle lines, I mean, we're talking about Myanmar and Hong Kong. The battle lines they're not just there. They're being drawn everywhere. And the pace is just so incredibly fast.
Yeah. And if I can echo what you said, there is business communities in my field. We are talking about an important point. These Chinese companies, they have to follow their Chinese rule, as you said, to be able to IPO in the US. But some of the Chinese rules and our rules have direct contradiction. So how can they satisfy both, right? So they may as well, I don't know, become American company and then IPO as American. Otherwise, I just don't know. We just don't know how they can satisfy two, contradictory regulations, and then go IPO in the US. Did you hear similar concerns in your community in your communities in Tokyo? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think I've just talked too much. I want to give Hayato a little bit of a chance.
Oh, hi. Well, thank you. Okay, can you hear me?
Sure.
Yeah, so, other thing, I mean, it's very simple to me, right? Meaning the Chinese, they don't care about the rules and contracts, right? And so for that, they'll just do whatever that they can get away. Yeah, because the nature of those guys or people are like the guerrillas, they're the leaders. And so, they'll just, do whatever they can get by, So the only words that they kind of know is the military power, and there's nothing else that might matter to them. So that's my view. Now going back to the, your comments on, let's say, Hong Kong or Myanmar, and that's coming back to the same thing, which is the Chinese, Myanmar, Vietnam, Cuba, those countries of guerrilla, right? So in those countries, you have this government, on the bottom level, right? In China, then you have a Chinese Communist Party, and top of that is like a Chinese military, right? So the military will do whatever they want to do at their pleasure, right? And there's nothing the Chinese Communist Party can do or the government can do about it, right? Yeah, because they have 25 million army, right? Yeah, so there's nothing you can do, right? Just in Beijing, they got like 5 million army sitting there, right? So not much to really discuss with this army, right? In reality. So for that, like in a case like say Hong Kong, in a case like Tiananmen Square, a case like in Myanmar, when their kind of power is threatened, they'll just do whatever they want to do to just control the situation, and there's no boundary in just laws or order or anything else. They really don't care, right? Yeah, because that's how those guys are, right? Then also like let's see. Going back to the Taiwan and those defense forces, the agreement or arrangement has been for the last 4 or 5 years. The U.S. naval self-defense force is going to guard the United States in the time of the war. So that meaning that the Chinese will come to Taiwan. What's going to happen is first, the U.S. Taiwan and U.S. going to try to defend their own, which is they have 50,000 soldiers in Taiwan. Then right away in the same day, the U.S. going to send the 3rd Marine from Okinawa, 50,000 Marines, to Taiwan to defend it, right? And then the U.S. and China and U.S. and Japanese is going to go and defend Taiwan within hoping the same day, and they have to keep that for 1 week until the U.S. will send their main like a battleship from Guam. And also the Hawaii. That's how the U.S. the defense strategy has been set up. So for that, the Japanese was already designated and has been trained to become the kind of pretty much the front line. Yeah, because if you are defending U.S. force, you'll be the front line, right? Yeah. So and let's see. And like I mentioned a few weeks ago, Japanese defense force, naval force, has been doing very well in the exercise. They always beat, the U.S. Navy in the military exercise. So for that, the U.S. has full confidence for the Japanese self-defense ability to defend on the front line against Chinese. So that's my take. I'm done talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayato. Hayato, you mentioned the Chinese acting like guerrillas and how they're going to implement or pursue, and they just don't pay attention to the rules. They do it their own way. This kind of suggests that there's not a lot of thinking. It's kind of reaction, counter-reaction, but I kind of don't see it that way. I think they know exactly what they're doing. They're on a 10-year plan. They're on a 100-year plan. The United States doesn't do business like that. The Japanese are better at planning and implementing. The United States doesn't typically publish a 10-year plan and stick to it with the change of governments that happen, sometimes every 4 years, but at least every 8 years. And the swaying back and forth with the hawks and the doves, the Democrats, the Republicans. China doesn't have that. Number one, China doesn't have to deal with that except when there's a change at the top, and then the new leader gets rid of the old leader's top cadre. But the Chinese, they are really, really smart at what they do, and they put a lot of intel, a lot of physical and personal intelligence into what they do. So the people that are running that, the people that are considering how to keep the amount of Chinese money in China and how to hurt the Americans, where as a kind of retribution for what is being done to Chinese companies, for example. It is really awesome. So it's not something to sneer at. The Chinese are, they're somebody to be afraid of. They know what they're doing and they know how to do it. I don't think that a kinetic action will start in Taiwan because the Chinese can achieve that without going through kinetic action. It just means it takes a little bit more time. But for the Chinese, that's never been an issue as long as they get what they want. A kinetic action would just cause so much destruction. They're on their way to building their own borders and redefining, the shipping lanes and the Belt and Road strategy, which has been successful and has been going on for 15 years now. So there's a lot going on, a lot to follow, and I really appreciate everybody's input because it's really important to all of us.
Yeah, I agree. So like I mentioned, on this long-term plan, so the Chinese always plan a 50-year plan to take over Hong Kong in full, and their plan is also to take over Taiwan in 50 years. So their 50-year plan, then that part of the plan is like their power is threatened anyway, like demonstration or anything, they want to crush it. So that's part of the 50-year plan. And what they did, right? Yeah,
they did it the next step.
Yeah, so they are always that's their plan, right? So they're trying to do the same way like they do in mainland China, which is just to control the media and try to control the media and try to do it by the fear. Because like I mentioned, 1% of people controlling 99% of people there, right?
Yeah, unlike the United States, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That was tongue-in-cheek. Anyway, Yuka, thank you for the great question. You see how much discussion it triggered. It's something that we should continue to keep our eyes on.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't mind, I'd like to move on to my final part, which is talking about Prime Minister Suga and the situation he's in. So without any further ado, and with nobody asking questions right now, I'd like to move on to that. So this isn't the hottest topic this week because, like I said, the Olympics are right in front of us. He has gotten beat up so badly. He got beat up with the Tokyo elections. They didn't do marvelously well. They won 8 additional seats. It's not even something to yawn at. It wasn't even, it's not a win. They, even with their Komeito coalition partner, they didn't capture 50%. Tomin First is still a power. And this controversy between, he's kind of standing in the middle. You've got Mr. Nikai, who is the Secretary General of the LDP and who defines election districts and individuals to run in the election districts. His power only increases the closer we come to an election of the lower house. Contrasted with Mr. Abe, Mr. Aso, and a couple of other people on the other side, there's a huge controversy going on there and a battle for power. And Mr. Suga is standing in the middle. He wants to continue to be prime minister, presumably, and he owes his position as prime minister to Mr. Nikai. If you've been on the show we've been going on for 3 months now, haven't we? Earlier in the show's history, in the room's history, we were talking about how Mr. Suga became prime minister, and it happened over a 24-hour period. This wasn't an election of members of the LDP. It wasn't an election of the politicians who are politicians within the LDP. It was Mr. Suga and Mr. Nikai. So Mr. Suga owes his position to Nikai, even though Nikai pulled a fast one and kind of surprised Mr. Abe and other people. They were, of course, involved in the in the decision making, but the person who gained the most out of that, other than Mr. Suga, was Mr. Nikai. And Mr. Nikai quickly went on, after having achieved that, of packing the LDP party posts, that's the LDP, that's the political party, the building that's across the street from the upper house Diet members building, with his kind of selected people. So as a consequence of that, Mr. Abe, Mr. Taro Aso, a couple of others, they diminished their luster and their ability to attract more people to their political factions. It is also instructive, as we talked earlier, that Ms. Koike visited with Mr. Nikai 2 days after the Tokyo elections were finished. So there's something going on there, and of course publicly they say, no, I just came to report about the elections and that sort of thing. It's almost laughable, because it is like a kowtow after the elections to go to visit Mr. Nikai in the party headquarters. It is suggestive of a lot of different things. So if you've watched television recently, you notice there are days when Mr. Suga looks spry and eager, and there are a lot of days where he just looks exhausted. And we're not even in the fight yet. He's rightfully exhausted because of a lot of things that he has little control over, which is the twists and turns of the Tokyo Olympics, what's going on with the vaccine rollout, how the by-elections happened over the last 2 months, the LDP not doing very well. He wants to become a prime minister again. I mean, he's only in a layover position now. He hasn't won on his own character, and it doesn't look very promising that he would be able to do that. He's the first prime minister to become prime minister without his own part of political faction. So he is just based on his own makeup. He's weak as a candidate, and he's got other things that are going against him. The next thing to watch with Mr. Suga is there's an election for mayor in Yokohama. That's on August 22nd. Today is the 12th, so it's a month and a half away. It's actually the election will be on the last day of the state of emergency. This will be the election for the mayor for Yokohama. The current mayor is Hayashi Fumiko. She is going to run again, but there is a LDP member in the lower house, Okonori, who is also going to run. He's going to resign from the lower house, and he's going to run as a candidate for Yokohama. You've got a Constitutional Democratic Party mayor, Yamanaka, who is also going to run as a candidate, and the former governor of Nagano is going to run. It's just a rich mix. You've got the current mayor who is going to run. You've got a former governor from Nagano who is going to run. You've got a mayor from the Constitutional Democratic Party who is going to run. He's going to change election districts. And then you've got this heavyweight from the LDP in the lower house who's going to resign and run for Yokohama. The interesting thing about this race is that the LDP needs to put their weight behind their candidate, because if they can have an LDP mayor in Yokohama, it makes things a lot easier. They don't have it in Tokyo, but if they could get it in Yokohama, that would be great for a couple of reasons. One being that Yokohama is one of the preferred sites for the casino. Osaka is one. Tokyo is another one, but Tokyo is less likely than Yokohama. Yokohama has a nice piece of land that is suitable, and Tokyo and Yokohama could kind of be considered a single district as far as a casino is concerned. The only problem with that is the casino law, the casino bill, was essentially created out of the Abe faction. So it's a bill that it wasn't generated through the bureaucracy, through the finance ministry, or through METI. Usually that's how bills are generated. Sometimes they're generated by members of the parliament, and they form a coalition of other members, and then they submit a bill. This one came out of Seiwakai, the Hosoda faction. And so the fact that they're going to have casinos in Japan is a big deal. It is a, what do they call it, a pork barrel project? Because lots of construction, less than, 3% of the entire site is occupied by the casino, but there's theaters, there's dance halls, wedding halls, restaurants. It's just a huge machine for economic development. And whenever something like that happens, the politicians are always eager to be involved because it helps generate lots of different funds for them and for their supporters. The unfortunate thing about that is that Yokohama is Mr. Suga's election district too. This new fellow from the LDP is not hot on the casinos. So he's got to support him because he's LDP in this four-person race for mayor, but the fellow doesn't support casinos. So there's a real tension there. It's like he's just getting pummeled, one thing right after another, an uppercut, a jab, a kick to the thighs. It just never ends for him. And this is the next one that you should keep your eye out. The Yokohama mayoral election campaigning will start about 10 days before the 22nd. It'll give it a good push, and you'll hear a lot about it. And leading up to that, the Olympics will have, the first part of the Olympics will have finished. We'll be into the Paralympics at that point. And we are just on the cusp of the prime minister having to make that difficult decision of calling the election or having the election for party president, which means a prime minister, which is first, which comes later. There was another controversy that was caused. Their Komeito partner, you might have followed this, I'm not sure, but their Komeito party, Yamaguchi is the name of the Komeito's chief, was asked a question about what he thought about the election for, when the election should be held and when the election for prime minister. And he says, well, I think the election for prime minister should be first, and then the election for the members, the 465 members of the lower house. And this causes a great controversy because they're in a coalition. Who are we talking about this? Maybe this was Yuka talking about this earlier. Why is the coalition? What supports the coalition? And this is one of those things that you look at and you find these cracks that are in the coalition that shows that it's not that strong, it's not that cohesive. And this crack here is that Komeito, you should shut up about what we're doing in the LDP with regard to the elections. And we need to stay firm on this. We need to have the same story that goes out. And it is the prime minister's prerogative of when he's going to close down the house. And you are our coalition partner. We honor you. We value you. But shut up. That's his prerogative. And you're screwing up things by throwing in, what you think. So it's interesting if you follow the dynamic there. There's stuff going on at that level, at the coalition level. After the Tokyo elections, this mix between Komeito and the LDP didn't work so well. The LDP didn't win, 25 seats. Komeito didn't win any seats. So that coalition gel that they had that is supposed to really inspire the population and gain them more votes and give them a couple more seats didn't work. And then a couple days later, you have the head of Komeito saying something like this that really upsets people. There's a lot going on, and if you're Mr. Suga, I would think, 1 year is enough. I'm going to go to the beach, and should that be his take? Then the door is open for a lot of people to weigh in. And we have endless discussions about who's going to be the next prime minister, who wants to be the next prime minister, who's willing to throw their hat in. Always in the discussion comes up, Mr. Abe, he's going to come back. He's going to come back swinging. He's going to take it over, and he's going to do it. Or the other one is that he's going to be a kingmaker. He's going to between him and his finance minister, Mr. Aso, they're going to figure out a plan. Mr. Amari's going to shoot through the roof. Konotaro's going to shoot through the roof. We're going to take over this thing, and we're going to take over the LDP headquarters as well. There's a lot going on. With that, I'd like to close it up. There are a couple of other things that we can toss into the mix after this, but I think there's a lot of questions and interest in what's going on with Mr. Suga, what the elections look like, what to anticipate, and who's doing what to whom. So with that, let me just wrap that up and see what the audience has to say. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening.
Thank you, Timothy. I have a question to you. You mentioned that, of course, there is a lot of movement and a lot of dynamics in LDP and the other parties and the coalitions. And coalitions are formed; they are also dissolved. But and there are a lot of gubernatorial elections as well throughout the country. And my question is, of course, we all know who are the candidates for prime minister this time in the coming elections this autumn. My question, though, is, are there any new rising stars, people who are likely to actually stand for prime minister's elections in for the next term, let's say in 4 years or so?
Yes. So it's a great question. So the main characters on the stage are already set. We already know the 4 or 5 most likely potential candidates. We know who those 5 are. It will probably come down to 3. And the reason why it'll probably come down to 3 is because if there are 3 candidates, you have a certain kind of an election. And if you have more than 3, then you have a different kind of election. Mm-hmm. So it takes more time, money, effort when it's a 4-party race. So they try and whittle it down so that it's 3. And that's all done within the LDP, right? Nobody else is involved in it. Komeito isn't involved in it. Nobody else. As long as you are the president of the LDP, you are therefore the president of the prime minister, because of the way the numbers are. The prime minister comes out of the lower house, and he is elected by popular acclaim by the members of the lower house. And if you have majority, which the LDP has a majority, with Komeito they almost have a super majority, but with Komeito they have absolutely a majority in the lower house. He becomes prime minister. So that's the reason there. Your question is who is coming up in 4 years? And my response to that is, you're not going to have to wait 4 years. There will be. I predict that Mr. Suga will not be able to succeed himself. There's too much momentum for that not to happen, and you will have once again a repeat of what we had before Mr. Abe. Mr. Abe was unique in that he was the longest serving prime minister. Everybody got used to him, and even foreign leaders could pronounce his name, Abe, right? So that was a true achievement. Whereas before that, it's kind of a revolving door of prime ministers, maybe 2 years, maybe 3. Very, very rare to be 4 years. So I predict that will be the change too. And of the 5 potential candidates that we have now, they're the most likely actors to be jockeying for position in the next controversy or the vote of no confidence for a new prime minister. So it is, it is, we just have to wait and see. But there are people who are not among the 5 who are up and rising. People love to talk about Koizumi. And Koizumi, yes, he's got great inertia. He's moving forward just because of his dad and because he has been blessed as, that kind of individual. So he's playing it clean. He and his wife, they're the political couple. He's Minister of Environment, so that's burnishing his brand. He'll probably maybe give that up in the next cabinet reshuffle, but he'll probably be another cabinet minister, which qualifies him once again. He needs to have a little bit more party experience, which might happen. So that's a possibility. More likely is Kono Taro. He's probably among the five, though. And I think Kono Taro would make a great prime minister. I think within the next, in short term, within the next 8 years, he will be prime minister. There's another one that's coming up pretty quickly. His name is Hayashi Yoshimasa. He's in the upper house. His father was in the lower house. And he's a pretty popular individual, but he's in the upper house. For those real geeky, wonky people, you might know that he is the lead guitarist in the band The Geens.
Wow.
I don't know if anybody in the audience is familiar with The Geens. The Geens is like a Giin, is a Kokkai Giin, and they formed a rock band called The Geens. Giinz, The Geens. And it's a rock band, very accomplished rock band. He's the lead creator there, and I've been to many of their concerts, many of their jam sessions. He's a great guy, and he's planning on changing in this election. He's in the upper house, going from the upper house to the lower house because he wants to become prime minister. Nobody would ever leave the comfort of the upper house and go to the lower house unless that was their intention. And if you give him 4 years, if that's your 4-year window, I would give him great credibility there because he's a dark horse. Nobody is talking about him because he's in the upper house. The prime minister had never, ever, and will never, ever come from the upper house. So him changing seats this time is a waving the flag that I'm coming at you. So I hope that responds somewhat to your question, Maya.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And just I wonder about Hayashi Yoshimasa. So in one of our previous conversations, you mentioned that in order to become prime minister, you actually need some credentials. You need to have held ministerial positions, right?
That's right.
But I am not sure.
He has been minister, yes.
He has been a minister. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that. I just needed to know that. Thank you.
Not only has he been a minister, but he's been the lead singer.
Of course, that's the most important part of it, right? Yes. Great. And well, we're open to other questions and comments. So everybody who is listening, please raise your hand. And everybody who is on stage, Hayato, please go ahead.
Oh, yes. Hi. So I have a little bit kind of update with I don't know news, but what I was advised was this week was Kono Taro is not going to make to become prime minister because he doesn't have active support of Mr. Aso in his the faction, right? Because
I heard that too.
For him to be the candidate, you need like a serious political coalition and push and all that. But Mr. Aso is not doing anything at all, right? So maybe Mr. Aso is just avoiding to just get into those political kind of fights, this Abe and Nikai. I heard that Nikai is going to make it to become another general secretary, and also Mr. Abe is not going to run because if he runs, he'll become prime minister. Then what's going to start the same day is revisiting of all the scandals that he has left before, like a Moritomo and all this thing. They're going to come back up right away, which he doesn't want to deal with it. So he won't run. One kind of unlikely or likely candidate is coming back to Kishida because he's the one that has run before. So he already has a support. He has a machine. He has a number of person doing that was recommending him. So he's the only one that's kind of maybe that one remaining because whoever does become the next prime minister, his tenure will be very short term. It's like a Suga. So nothing is going well right now. That calls and everything else. So for that, like at the end, we may not have any other strong candidate to run at this moment. That's my take. And Suga is not what to make it. That's my update to what I heard. I'm done.
Thank you very much. Yes, Kishida's name has come up remarkably frequently over the last 2 weeks. So had we had this conversation 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, it would have generated this same kind of chuckle that I had when Claude asked about Koike becoming prime minister. But the reality is we're talking about Japanese politics, and the calculus is just different. It's a different world. Decisions are made based on a different way of evaluating and counting and lots of things here. And yes, Kishida's name has come up prominently because the other candidates could cancel themselves out because of the fight that you're talking about. I think, yeah, I don't know. If I was Mr. Aso, I'd rather be a kingmaker than not have a candidate. So Konotaro, as my protege, he's not really the protege because there are other people in the Aso faction that are older, that have been elected more, that have probably a better pedigree than Konotaro, but Konotaro is just, his dad was Speaker of the House. His dad was very popular. Yeah, it's a horse race, and at this point, it's too difficult to predict. But we can talk about it productively as we do on this room every week, and every week is a different horse. So I appreciate your input, Hayato, as always. Thank you.
Yeah, and also I heard like Mr. Aso and Mr. Nikai, they may run one more time for 4 more years, and they may want to retire. So maybe that's another reason that Aso is getting kind of burned out, because he's thinking about retirement in the near future.
Yeah, with Aso, I could see him running again to become finance minister yet again, vice prime minister again. With Nikai, I don't see that. He's just although he is powerful, it's hard to at least visually connect with him. I think voters, especially younger voters, feel that as well. And I think he's like 79 years old, and it really shows. So a lot of change.
I heard Nikai cannot retire because his son is not standing strong enough. So he wants to, keep going a little bit longer until he can, his son to stand on his own. So that's the main reason I heard that he's doing for 1 more term, 4 more years.
Okay, well, if he decides to do it, he'll win, and maybe he'll be comatose by the time that his next term ends. But yeah, he is pushing the boundaries there.
Yeah, he has one smart son, one dumb son, and he wants to kind of pass his, home ground to the smarter son, hopefully next 4 years. That's his last plan.
Great insight, Hayato. Thank you. Anybody else? If not, I've got a couple of other nice tidbits to toss in. But go ahead, Yuka.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry it's getting long, but I have a question on casino. The talks of building casino in Japan, full-blown casino, has been in the works for like probably 10 years, right? So my question to you, Tim, is what's the major opposition to that idea? Is there a moral argument against like a gambling facilities, or I think it's kind of, I don't want to use the word obvious, but it's going to lead to more jobs and more activities, right? So what is the reason of not building one yet?
Okay, so but you put your finger on it already, Yuka. It's the moral argument, and gosh, I don't know how to describe this without sounding like I'm racist or something. But Chinese, Taiwanese, Hong Kongese love to gamble, and they're famous gamblers all over the world. Lots of whales, and even in Japan, this gambling, I don't know, something within the personality or the national core is as prevalent, and I think the Japanese want to diminish that. So there are certain places that you can gamble, the boat races, the horse races, even pachinko's not really gambling, but it's kind of gambling. But these avenues of gambling are very popular, and it's like with the Japanese becoming otaku at anything, they get really into it. And they study the numbers and the horses and the pedigrees, and do they cut their toenails, and all sorts of things there. So I think the moral argument is holding sway. And with Komeito is against it, and the LDP representing big business and generating money for the economy and big projects. I mean, this is a huge project, and I'm with you that it is a catalyst for just exploding art and theater and drama and food, and even though they're just islands of that are anchored on a casino, the casino is a very tiny part, but having this new push on theaters and food, I mean, it would just be so incredible. The other argument to that is that the technology coming in with the casinos, it's all foreign technology. It's not homegrown Japanese technology. So that means that a lot of the money that would be used to develop it is leaving Japan, and that's something the Japanese just hate to do. They'd rather have something that doesn't work very well, but it's developed here in Japan because you're not paying for the IP, you're not sending money overseas to import certain products or components. You'd rather develop it here. I think the Japanese government decision is that's more favorable to it importing. We're an export economy, so the more you can do with exporting and the least that you can do with importing, the better. And importing the technology, the shows, the magicians, everything there, it's going to be quite a while before the Japanese can come up to speed and service that all by themselves, and there'll be long-term contracts and that sort of thing. But I think that's the other argument too.
Okay, thank you. I know the last point about money leaving Japan, I haven't thought about that, and that's a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuka.
Kumi, hello. I think it's good evening for you. Thank you very much for coming up. Yes.
Thank you so much, Maya, for having me. Hi, Timothy, and hi, everyone. I have a question with regards to the one that you mentioned earlier about the Prime Minister. Timothy, I think you said it earlier about switching the Prime Minister. You referred it as a revolving door, and I have this question. And I used to live in Japan, and I've always wondered why. But you know how Prime Ministers in Japan, very typical for not completing the term. And I guess former Prime Minister Abe was quite sort of a unique situation where he had completed 2 terms and he returned. So I would see that he had sort of like a leadership or charisma. And, that's sort of a unique situation. But it has switched so many times. I don't even remember who the Prime Minister was before Mr. Abe. And, one would argue that this is within the same party, same political party, LDP, so there's not much change, whereas, but unlike places in Canada, we have one Prime Minister that would complete a term unless there is a huge scandal. They would remain in the term, but I just wanted to know, does this seem sort of like norm in the global society, within, say, for example, G7, G20, do they seem to be oh, okay, Japan's got the new Prime Minister within 2 years, 3 years term, there's another new guy here, how do they see this switching?
Well, with Abe, that went on for 12 years. That's how do you describe it? That's like elephant's years, right? I mean,
Yeah.
There have been so many other political changes throughout the world in 12 years, and Mr. Abe's still there. We still can't pronounce his last name, but he's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the dynamic here is that this long push to extract power that has accumulated within the various ministries and distributing it, first of all, to the members of the parliament, the lower house in particular, but the upper house too, and from there to collect it within the office of the prime minister and the cabinet office. So that transition, that started with Koizumi a long time ago, and that has gradually come, it's rebound from the lower house, the upper house, into the prime minister's office, and this is what Mr. Abe benefited from that, and he was able to capture that. So people frequently say, he's a charismatic leader. I don't see Mr. Abe as charismatic at all. He's not very funny. He falls down in the sand trap. That was pretty funny. But I don't see him as really charismatic. But he does have a machine. He has the largest political faction, and he has a great pedigree. And he was able to establish that longevity, hopefully to transition to the next prime minister. I don't know if that will be successful because there's so many contenders and there's so much factionalism going on right now. So many fights. I mean, the Kishi, the LDP party had Nikai, that going on head to head with Mr. Abe and Mr. Suga standing in the middle. This is it's disastrous in terms of repeating what Mr. Abe had. Certainly, Suga is not Mr. Abe, right? So he's holdover. If things went well for him, maybe he would have cut a new cloth, that the prime minister doesn't need to come from a political faction base, that it can be any one of these 465 members of the lower house. Anybody can become prime minister. If Mr. Suga did, you can too, so you should aspire to that. Maybe, but it doesn't look like that combination is going to work. It looks like it's going to be factionalism. Who can make a coalition with another faction so that we get more votes than the Nikai faction or something like that, and it's just tenuous. And all you need, as you said, all you need is a scandal. And you can take your pick here. Everybody's hiding scandals in the closet, and with the temperament of the Japanese population, you don't need much of a scandal. A couple of 100 yen in the or a couple of more than a couple hundred, but a couple hundred ichiman satsu in the bottom of the bag under the box of cookies, that'll do it. And that happens so frequently that it's surprising that it doesn't come to light more often.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Timothy.
So just once again, just to round it out, your question was basically the shifting seat of prime minister. What does that look like in the future? And I think I don't think we have to wait as Maya suggested for 4 years for us to have another election.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome to the room. Kumi, please join us again.
Will do. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Oh, I have an additional comment. So I heard also Mr. Abe is very interested coming back in the future when everything is going to settle down, when he won't get back into the scandal again. Yeah, so 4 years later, before the young uprising star will have a chance, maybe Mr. Abe is going to do the third term. Right? I'm done talking.
Yeah, the thing about Sakura Mirukai, right, and also the school in Osaka.
Yeah, Moritomo, right.
Moritomo, and to a lesser degree the veterinarian school. These things are things that happen on a daily basis in any event. Schools are still going to be built. People are still going to have these parties in Osaka, in Shinjuku Gyoen, the Benkyo Kai, the Hagemasu Kai. It still happens. Konotara was criticized because he didn't submit the receipts for the people who rode the bus to go to tour the the parliament, right, which happens on almost a daily basis. So there's lots of stuff that goes on there, and I think, I think if I was Abe, I would not chance it. How that money was spent and who gave the authorization, I think there's this tension between Nikai and Mr. Abe, and it's kind of an undeclared war, and it's because that money was authorized by Mr. Abe, and it was provided by Mr. Nikai. It was party money that needed the authorization of Mr. Abe to get the elections in Hiroshima. And so I think they're both holding each other at a stalemate. I'm not going to say anything if you don't say anything. I think that's how they're going to keep it, because they're both guilty. And I think everybody who watches this knows that the several $100,000 that went to the two politicians who were distributing it, it came from those it required that kind of authorization. There are people that are against Mr. Abe, the public prosecutor, the chief public prosecutor in particular. But if Mr. Abe was successful in becoming prime minister, he could clean house. He could take care of that. He could reestablish his preeminence. He's not going to be making a mistake like that again. And he has a firmer control on the press too, which he didn't have initially. He began to form that over the 12 years that he was there. So it's interesting that there are a lot of things going on in American politics that people love to follow, with Tucker Carlson being spied on by the NSA, and, this tremendous hatred directed at former President Trump. All of those things, they're somewhat reflective of what goes on in Japanese politics too, but it's interesting to watch that. I'm done.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? I'm going to switch off the hand raising in a minute or so. So if you have something to say, if you would like to join the conversation, please let us know.
Well, I have a question. So
yes, please.
It's about the semiconductor industry. So hello everyone. No matter where you are, this is Helen. I'm originally from Taiwan, currently based in the United States. So I've been in this room for a few hours, and I really appreciate what I learned. Thank you so much. So that we learned that over the past few months, that the States is planning to, we have an agreement between Taiwan and the
Arizona.
States. Right. So the TSMC is moving to visit Phoenix, Arizona. In support of TSMC, we probably could predict that, the supply chain of semiconductor in Taiwan will also shift there. Like there are some smaller companies that will move in order to support TSMC in Arizona. We also learned that TSMC is planning to invest in Japan
heavily.
in collaboration with Japan in terms of research. I'm not quite familiar with the plan that Japan has, so I would appreciate that, that we see that the foundries in Arizona, we see that, there will be more employment in Arizona. But in terms of research, what will be the insight that you have in Japan?
Great. Thank you, Helen. Great question, and there is a lot going on there. In fact, this was a topic of conversation between Suga and Biden when they first met. And maybe a week after their meeting, so whenever the heads of state meet, it's usually dozens and dozens of other people meet, and they generally just have tea together, they talk, they chat. They don't really get into these kinds of heavy discussions. It's their teams that are making lots of decisions and negotiations. The heads of state do talk about, they have their talking points, but they meet so briefly that there's really not that much that they can achieve individually. So it takes a little bit of time once the heads of state meeting happens for the news to filter out, but it only took about a week or 10 days before the agreement between Biden and Suga was that Biden was going to invest $3 billion. He committed $3 billion into semiconductor research and development and enhancing the U.S. capability. And as a corollary to that, Suga said, well, you're putting in 3, we're going to put in 2. It's not 3, it's not the same. And so it's kind of like a junior partner. And but it is what they can commit to. And it is for, number one, the supply chain, and also for, it's basically supply chain. So it's subsidies, it's support for not just Japanese companies, but Japanese companies who maybe they went to China. The labor is cheaper there to do manufacturing, to disengage from the manufacturing part and go to someplace else in Southeast Asia that is a little bit better, a little bit more secure in terms of supply chain, or perhaps coming to Japan. And the incentives increase the closer you come to Japan. Incentives and the subsidies, that sort of thing. And if it's a Japanese company, then it's even more enhanced. So the supply chain is a big deal. They're going to be doing manufacturing. It's a huge industry. TSMC will be supplying part of that, but the Japanese government will be providing a lot of the investment too for building the fab in Shizuoka. So that's already on the boards. They're going to need a lot of help in terms of employment and water and electricity and that sort of thing. That's one component. They need to bring in lots of Japanese supplier companies into this production facility as well. So they've already earmarked it with Panasonic and Kyocera and some of these other companies. They're also in that. So this distribution of the intelligence and the manufacturing process and that sort of thing, it's not like they're just coming in and they're going to build it and then they ship it out the door and they collect the money and then they ship the money back to Taiwan. A lot of it is being generated internally. The second component of that, and I think the thrust of your question, Helen, is the research and development. So you know that Tsukuba is about an hour outside of Tokyo. It is a huge, it's kind of like Silicon Valley in the United States. It is portrayed as a hub for universities and basic and applied research. There's a lot going on there. And so there are, they already have, TSMC already has a research facility there. It will be enhanced and expanded. And part of that will be at the benefit of receiving Japanese government for that. That's not just with that one Taiwanese company. It's happening across the board. German companies who are good in their particular areas, American companies as well, but the Americans have the benefit of, the $3 billion that the U.S. president has committed to that. So it might be a sweeter deal to stay in the United States, but it's, Japan has its own attraction too. So I hope that responds somewhat to your question.
Thank you. That's very comprehensive. I think one concern that Taiwanese people will have is that whether, for instance, the United States will keep the same level of commitment to Taiwan security if the supply chain of semiconductor, is moved to other places in the world. That's just one concern.
It's funny that you say that. I was in a meeting with a member of the parliament 2 weeks ago. It was a 2-on-1 briefing. We were giving each other briefings. He was briefing us. We were briefing him. And he said exactly the same thing, that Japan really needs to ramp up its commitment to the supply chain, and in particular semiconductors and chips, because we really can't rely on the Americans to be there for us if we run into a crunch, a supply crunch, or something happens in Taiwan. Because, we just finished having Mr. Trump, who was always, America first. And where the hell does that put us? And so we really need to be more self-sufficient. We need to be more reliant on our own resources and production facilities. And if it's important to us, and we've already decided that semiconductors and chips, condensers are a strategic national asset. So that's a big deal. And so that means the number and amount of foreign investment in a strategic national asset is somewhat limited and that it receives a special priority treatment by the Japanese government. That's going full bore, but this shadow of the Trump administration and America first, and you should pay your own way, and we're not sure that you're paying your fair way of the American soldiers defending you, that sort of thing. It's really caused a lot of consternation among Japanese policy makers as well, and it touches directly on the point that you just raised. So thank you for that.
Thanks a lot.
May I add something on top of what Timothy said?
Yes,
Sure,
please.
Rand, go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you. Hello, Helen. I'm actually in the semiconductor industry, so maybe I'm not sure you were asking not only the political question, but also the technical question. But if I can shed some light on the on the technical side, which may eventually lead to political subject, but I think from Japan's point of view, I think we admire TSMC's technologies greatly, and I think the majority of the people in semiconductor industries in Japan really want to work with TSMC because I think TSMC's manufacturing fabrication technologies are years ahead of some of the competitors, including Intel. Having said that, Japan does have some companies that are really good at the post-processing, which you may already know. As you know, the semiconductor manufacturing is quite complicated, but you can really divide that into two parts: the front-end processing and the back-end processing. And the Japanese companies, some of these chemical companies, are really good at the back-end side. So I think Japanese companies want to really bring TSMC into a situation that they have to depend on the Japanese companies' back-end technologies to become even stronger. And I think that Timothy can teach me, but I think that would form a very strategic political relationship between Japan and Taiwan in unprecedented way. Because semiconductor is such an important. By the way, I just sold my 11-year-old car. I was able to retain 80% of the price that I purchased 11 years ago because of the semiconductor shortage, and there's not many cars on the market in the US. So this is just an example of how critical the semiconductors issues are, and the Japanese company is trying to tie up with TSMC to form the world's strongest back-end part of the semiconductor manufacturing process in the world, is something that I cherish, unless there are some blind sides that I'm not noticing it. Maybe Helen, you can tell me, or maybe Timothy, you can tell me. Otherwise, I think this is a great partnership. Or maybe I'm too naive. I would like to be corrected if I'm wrong.
Oh, hi, can I add something here?
Please go ahead, yes.
Okay, not to rant, but anyway, in general. So, there's my suggestion here is, if the semiconductor industry in Japan wants to do this, and just go lobby for the United States president, right? Because, semiconductor, this factory is coming to Arizona only because Cindy McCain, the Mrs. Joe McCain, carry 4 states for the President Biden, right? Yeah, so everything has a price. So now this is how she got favor in return. So that's how the real world works. Yeah, so like if you really want to be serious, go lobby for the president, next presidential election. And because that's it does not matter how good or how great you are, but it matters and how strong you are politically. I'm done, folks.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Hayato.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understood what Hayato says. Are you saying that? Are you suggesting that if Taiwan wants to use semiconductor to protect their national security, Taiwan should be more proactive in approaching the U.S. leaders?
Oh, no. This is going to be quick. So Yeah, the only reason, as far as I see, that this thing is coming to Arizona is because of the what the Cindy McCain did for the Joe Biden in his president election. And she, as a matter of fact, she may be the most powerful person in the United States today. Yeah, because she was chairman of the selection committee to select all the Secretary of State and all these ministers in the United States, right? Yeah, so this is how this real life politics works, you know. So she brought the 4 states for the President Biden, right? So this is how she was paid, got compensated in return in a favor. So that if the Japan, right, want to form those, you know, is really serious about, you know, try to get something closer to Taiwan, and Taiwan is de facto in a way controlled by the United States because the United States provide the military service, right? Yeah, so whoever that has the military is the one that's in charge. Yeah, so otherwise it will never change. That's my view, right? I'm just talking. Thank you.
Okay, so you're saying, well, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just trying to make sure I understood you correctly, accurately. Are you saying Taiwan should have someone like Mrs. McCain?
Not Taiwan, right? So Japan.
You mean Japan? Japan.
So if they want to redo, right? And, I mean, because the Japan or Japanese government or Japanese leaders assume that, you know, because the United States is an ally, to the Japan, the U.S. will do everything for free, right? But as you know, in the real life, in the United States, nothing for free, right? And there's always, even you don't pay money, there's always a return favor relationship, right? So in this case, the one that has the strongest power, in all the parties of the United States. So whoever the United States tell to do, that's what's going to happen. That's happening here, right? So that I'm done talking. And by the way, so Japan has now industry has not lobbied at all for the United States now, right? So that's so U.S. will be give a very friendly treatment there, right? Yeah, but but it would do better, if you lobby for the United States.
I mean, Japan lobbying for the United States.
Yeah, everybody else does, by the way, right?
Yeah.
UK does, France does, China does, Russia does, right? Only country government, right, that does not do any lobbying in the United States to Japan. Yeah, because they just assume everything's for free, right? So that's how we get.
So the logic I understood from what you said is Mrs. McCain really helped President Biden. So her state got the investment.
She carried the whole state. Right. Yeah, because
using that analogy, if Japan helped Mr. Biden, you mean the American company may invest in Japan also in addition to TSMC? Is that how the logic works?
Sure, it could. Of course.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Going to set up another factory, right? It's very easy.
But what do you think, Timothy? Do you really think Intel would want to set a factory in Japan next to TSMC? Well, TSMC went to Arizona first, and then Intel came later. But in this case, maybe TSMC first, and then Intel come next in Tsukuba. That's not inconceivable, I guess.
No, I think historically the Japanese haven't been very good at lobbying the United States, as Hayato points out. Historically, they haven't been skillful at it. I'm sure they've attempted to do it. They've gone through law firms. They've hired consultants and former members of state legislature, sometimes the National Congress, to be on their boards and maybe former ambassadors. We've seen that a lot. But they're just not very skillful at it. And the alternative to that is having state actors do that for the Japanese people, which would be like Keidanren or the various ministries or the embassy, that sort of thing. And that's not very easily done. And the Japanese companies are not that engaged in it. European countries are much more engaged in it. And similarly, U.S. companies are not very skillful at lobbying the Japanese government. I mean, there have been efforts to enhance that. The American Chamber of Commerce does kind of a training vehicle for people who live in Japan and run companies. It's called the Diet Dornock, and it brings them into the Diet and it helps them, shows them how you might lobby without having to go in with a suitcase of money. But it's a very complicated art. It's not just a skill. It's an art of how to appeal to policymakers and politicians without being captured by the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, by somebody told you you should bring the cookies and put the envelope there, and it's just so hard, and the cost of making mistakes is so great that I think most of the Japanese and most of the Americans in particular avoid doing that. But as Hayato says, it is extremely effective. If you want to get something done, you have to pay the price. You have to contribute. You have to be engaged. But I think the reason why the Americans might consider that is because of market access. The Japanese have constructed barriers to come in and set up shops and to sell your wares. You have to pay. You have to supply. You have to meet requirements that your Japanese competitors don't. And similarly, Japanese companies going to the United States, for example, Toyota. Toyota going to the United States. Toyota just announced a huge lobbying move. I don't know if you followed this. Ren, are you a car guy?
I'm a big car guy. But
okay.
Not because you know.
Okay, so you might have noticed this then, that Toyota just announced that they're not going to be giving any campaign contributions to anybody but Biden candidates.
Right. Anybody that was supporting a former President Trump. Yes, I saw that news. That was a little bit of a shocker for me. And they didn't have to say that. I don't know why they had to make that announcement. Was they okay? They wanted to please President Biden. Maybe that's why they made that announcement.
Yeah, but it follows on what Hayato was saying about if you want favors, if you want to get something done in your district, you have to play the game.
But also another point is the automobile industry, they are looking 8 years or 12 years down the road, so they must have something that we do not know that convinces them that President Biden's legacy is going to. I mean, in other words, the Democratic parties are going to continue to be in the White House for the next 10 or 12 years. Maybe they know something that we don't.
Yeah, you say that, but they got caught with their pants down on the restriction on semiconductors. So you would think, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, that's semiconductor is. But Timothy, if I may, I would like to turn the question, the topic back to Helen, who brought up this issue, this topic. Circle back to her. If I may ask Helen, what Helen's desired outcome, or should I say, what Helen would like to see happening in the next 12 to 24 months between US, Japan, and Taiwan surrounding this very important semiconductor issue.
Well, I'm not a semiconductor person. I came with almost no background. That's
Oh, sorry, Helen, I didn't mean that. It was not a semiconductor question. It was more of an international relation question.
Oh yeah. Yes, exactly. Then I think I can provide some personal perspective. So I'm Taiwanese. And I, over all my life, I have heard that Taiwan has maintained a very good relationship with Japan, and the United States were all allies all the time, and even all my grandparents were used to be Japanese. That Japan ruled Taiwan for 50 years, and some of them went to Japan to study. So there actually a strong connection between my family in Japan, and also many other families in Taiwan have the same connections. And now I'm in the United States. People in my generation and also in my parents' generation would prefer to go to the States for study. But people in my grandparents' generation went to Japan. And I think that Taiwan is heavily influenced by both of the countries in terms of its many things, development, its culture, its values, and we are always like stand strong with, the freedom and democratic side. And that's what I really appreciate. And I think that, I'm not sure what Rand mentioned, 24 months from now, but I think that what I really want to see is really, like we can really foster the relationship. And I think for Taiwan, for decades, China is always the threat. It never gives up on, taking Taiwan by force. And you can listen to, like the talk that Xi Jinping had just maybe last week when they had like the celebration of the CCP centenary. For, it's 100 years that like Xi Jinping had a talk, and his language was even more belligerent, and that really put Taiwanese, aware of the situation, and also look at what's happening in Hong Kong, in East Turkestan. Look at what the CCP is doing with the Uyghur people and how they also suppress their like the Han Chinese in terms of freedom of speech and many other things. I think Taiwanese are really, really aware of this, and we don't want to be controlled by China. And we see that there's this Indo-Pacific strategy, and Japan and the States are forming a very strong relationship, fostering the security in the Pacific Ocean, in this region, and so it's like Australia and India are also part of this. So I think that as a Taiwanese, I really would love to see that we stand strong on the side of this alliance. There are some nuances in Taiwan. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I think that maybe one or two particular opposition parties are really inclining to work with China, work with the CCP. They could just deliver misinformation, smear the reputation of Japan or the US politicians, and also our local politicians. And I think that's a kind of, I am very worried about this because I think their technique is just you can identify, you can see that's their tactic, but like many people can be influenced and that can affect our election results. And you see that Taiwan have been controlling the pandemic so well since the beginning, but then we had an outbreak, although comparatively it wasn't so bad. However, that just because Taiwan was doing too well at the beginning, and now people are kind of blaming the government for not giving us enough vaccines. And by saying that, I really appreciate that the States and Japan donated us so many vaccines, and that's really very timely rain to solve a very urgent issue. And I think I do see that we have strong relationship, and I really want to see that we continue doing this. I think that Taiwan is really in the front of a potential war. We don't want to see a war. I think nobody wants to see a war. But I also think that if we can recognize Taiwan's status even more, helping Taiwan participating more international organizations and raise people's awareness that Taiwan is an independent sovereignty and the people in Taiwan deserve more rights. I mean, rights like the young people's right, that's what other young people in other countries have, for instance, participating in international affairs, right? Like participating in some organizations in the United Nations, and this is the right that Taiwanese young people have been deprived of for several decades, and I don't think that is fair. So I think that if we can really foster the relationship. And as Ren and Timothy and Hayato have mentioned, collaborating in many ways and make Taiwan stronger. I think a stronger Taiwan also means a safer Pacific Ocean, a safer Pacific region, and that's safer for everybody. Just get peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, for answering my question. Maya, I'm sorry, I don't want to take too much of time, but I just want to make one short feedback to Helen, if I may.
Sure, please go ahead.
Thank you. Helen, I think Timothy, I trust Timothy would agree with me, but I think when US and Japan send so many vaccines to Taiwan, it's not because Taiwan has semiconductor. I think it's because we all share the same values, and I think Timothy can teach me, but I think the majority of the Japanese politicians also are fully aware that Taiwan's democracy was not forced by the US, not like Japan, which was forced by the US in certain sense. Taiwan's democracy was really born out of the Taiwanese own people. That's what makes Taiwan so special, right? And if you look at the entire Asia, not many countries really transform from inside out to become a truly democratic country. And that's why a lot of countries wanted to help Taiwan, not just because you have semiconductor. And that's the statement. I appreciate Maya to giving me the space to give this feedback to Helen. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. That's also what's in my mind. I think that we all hold the same values. And of course that the semiconductor industry is very important, and you have this combat with China, and we want to win the technological war. And I can see that in support of Japan and the States, Taiwan also benefits from it. But what's the most important and what's the most essential is that we all share the same values, right? And that's why we work together. Without that, that's the presumption we share the same values. Without, we cannot do anything, and we probably couldn't have anything to share to support each other. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Ren. Thank you, Helen. Mayoko, we've got Mayoko, who is based in Hong Kong. Good morning to you.
Morning, Maya, Timothy, and everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for the great conversation. Thank you for the great conversation as always. Believe it or not, I don't have anything to add to the topic of Hong Kong. I think I've said more than enough last week, and I couldn't come up with anything intelligent to say. So I actually came up to make a request, and I know it's been more than 2.5 hours here, and Timothy, I'm sure you're itching to go sailing. So
that's next week. This week
okay.
I'm not. So
okay.
I will beg everybody's indulgence, because next week I will be with several boats, and I think it'll be pretty. I don't know if I'll be able to have the space to tell everybody to shut up so that I can host this room, but I'm going to do my best. Maybe they'll just put me on a small rowboat and set me adrift.
Okay, but anyway, my request is, I think, for another room, because this room is on Japanese politics. But I wonder, Timothy, if you could one day talk about how you found your passion in politics. I'm curious because I'm in the field of learning and development, and I'm passionate about helping people achieve their full potential. So I'm always interested in knowing how people find their passion and how they pursue their passion. So yeah,
Great.
How did you first become interested in politics? Did you do anything to nurture your interest, etc.? So I would love to hear that one day.
So it is my favorite topic to talk about, but let me not bore everybody. What I would suggest is just link up with me on Facebook. I'm a frustrated writer. I should have been a writer or maybe a college professor, but I took the evil road instead. But as a result of that, I do write a lot. I write a lot of stories, short stories, funny stories, usually I'm the one that you're laughing at because I'm making all these mistakes. But I publish that stuff on Facebook. And so if you go to Facebook, there's a lot there, photographs and stories and stories that I've written. If you go there, you'll get a better feel of how I got where I am and how many mistakes I made in getting here. So, and plus it would just be great to be on Facebook with you because we just get to know each other so much better.
Well, thank you. Mayuko, I hope that this answers your question to a certain point. Probably not 100%, yes, but please connect with Timothy on Facebook.
And yeah, there was an interview on Asian Boss. So my son and I were on Asian Boss, Kelly. I think Kelly's in the room.
Yes, he is.
And the interview question was kind of like that, like, who are you and why are you here? And you live in Tokyo? And when are you going to go home? That sort of thing. And it was a pretty long interview, pretty interesting. And that's up there as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, Maya, before you close the room, there were two issues that I want to talk about. Let's push them off for next week while I'm sitting on a little rowboat without a row as waves are lapping at the side and I'm getting farther and farther away from my mates. There are two issues that maybe we can talk about next week. They're kind of Japanese politics. Everything's politics, actually, when you get right down to it. The first issue is with Komuro Kei. He is or was the betrothed to Princess Mako. And you might remember that there was a controversy about money from his education, from his family. And so he left his job working at a law firm in Tokyo and went to Fordham to go to law school. And that story is bubbling up again. They still wanted to get married, and there's a lot of juicy stuff talking about, succession, about the royal family, about the role of the emperor and the fact that it must be a male heir, and should it be a male heir, and can't it be a female heir, that sort of thing. So that's something that I would love to get into. There's also another topic of Kyoto potentially going bankrupt, the city of Kyoto going bankrupt as a consequence of COVID and a lot of other things. That's shocking news. It's only beginning to bubble up now. It is very rare for a Japanese city to fiscally admit that its finances have been so mishandled that it could potentially go bankrupt and ask the national government to help it out.
When did that news come out?
I think that was yesterday.
That's shocking.
Shocking, right?
Yeah, and my friend who lives in Kyoto is one of your audience here. I hope he can raise his hand to. Well, if our room has time, but I'm sure he has a lot to say. Hirodi-san, if you want to raise your hand, he's from Kyoto. Yeah, he's
okay. No, I'm just wrapping it up. So Ren, I'm suggesting that maybe this is a topic for next week, and but you've just told me that it's a great issue. So let's try and carve out some time for it. And it'll also give it another week to kind of fester a little bit, and so it might be a richer dialogue. And plus, if your friend what's his name?
His name is Hirodi-san. Hirodi is in the audience right now. I think he's following you. You may.
Okay. So Maya, in her dictatorial exercise of power, has locked the room, so no people can't come on. She's really trying to close this room.
I'm so sorry for that.
Sorry, Maya. I'm so sorry, Maya.
No, that's okay, Ren. Thank you very much for letting us know. Yes.
The final point that I would like to roll into a little bit, if we have time. These rooms are so interesting. I try and talk as little as possible, but I blabber on. But it's such a great room, and the discussions we have are really insightful. But the third point that I would like to talk about, if maybe we can get into it, is why a Japanese politician would go from the upper house to the lower house. And that's going to happen with Mr. Hayashi. And I'd like to just delve into that a little bit because it's insightful on how politics works and why people become members of parliament and how they choose between the upper house and the lower house. So I'd like to get into that because this is Japanese Politics 101. It's supposed to reveal and kind of not teach, because people kind of understand the basics, but show you how in reality Japanese politics moves and works. And so I'd like to touch on that because I think it's a great example and interesting for how politicians become actual politicians. So with that, Maya?
Yes, thank you very much for that. To everybody, not only to Mayuko, of course, but to everybody who is here and would like to connect with Timothy, please give him a follow on Facebook, also on LinkedIn. As you already know, Timothy has a series of Politics 101 on YouTube, so videos which are very informative as well. Also, you can visit his company's homepage, Langley Esquire. And of course, you can give us a follow here on Clubhouse as well. You can follow the Japan Expert Insights Club here so that you can get notifications about the next rooms. And well, if you want to know how the story goes on, what happens next, we'll be here again next week. The same time, Sunday, 8 o'clock in the morning. Of course, Timothy may be rocking on a boat, but please indulge him and let him, sorry, Timothy, but
okay.
Right. So anyway, we hope to hear from you again next Sunday. All right. Oh, no reply. Okay. Anyway, so thank you very much.
No, okay. I didn't know you were talking
to you.
Me, but yeah.
Right. Okay. So everybody who stuck with us for 2.5 hours, thank you for coming. Thank you very much indeed. It has been a wonderful discussion. We're looking forward to talking with you again next week. Have a great day. With this, I'm saying see you again and enjoy the day.